So I actually just realized 10 minutes before this talk that maybe the title isn't so good because it ends with David cutting the head off of Goliath. And there's a lot of like blood and... So this is actually more of a riff. So I was supposed to give this talk together with Jana Kalin, who is the head of automation at Alfa Laval. But he got a terrible man cold. And he called me as well to just prove to me that he was actually sick, and he sounded very, very sick. So this is just really a list of things that we have learned from working together with Alfa Laval, and I'm going to give you like 1 minute background or so. So this is how how it can feel like sometimes when you're a startup and you're talking to lots of different people at large companies. You kind of feel quite small, quite scared. And of course, the story ends in a good way for the startup. But I want to tell you a little bit about David, which is us. So background to us is that we work with a bunch of companies now, but Alfa Laval was really the first company that believed in us when literally there was nothing. Like even our demo was terrible, our pitch was terrible. I wasn't like 100% coherent during the meetings that we had. But there was a pretty good relationship right from the start, like a pretty good interpersonal relationship. And then, we have recently raised money from Creandum and Point 9 Capital. Also, again, much thanks to Alfa Laval, actually. They served as a reference customer. People kind of call them up and ask, how is this startup doing? Would you guys sign a bigger contract with these guys and all these kind of questions? And then the team, we're met at Palantir. My co-founder is also in the audience here somewhere, taking a picture right now. There's some other, we come from some other companies as well. So Goliath, briefly, this was Jan's slide, but the one thing I can say about this slide is that the machines that Alfa Laval produce actually are quite important in the world. So they create clean energy, clean water, do all kinds of stuff, which is, and because our startup helps fix those machines. That's basically our business idea. It feels quite meaningful to help fix machines that actually can, in some sense, run the world. This is our journey. So we started with a proof of concept. All in all, it took 1.5 years or so before we got to enterprise agreement. We did a bunch of pilots actually in between. So 4 pilots all in all with the proof of concept. And I looked at our, we have some internal CRM as you have as a startup where you kind of keep track of everyone you talk to and so on. And we had talked to 53 people at Alfa Laval. So it takes some time to do these things. Okay, so now I'm going to riff. So we have a bunch of lessons learned. This is basically like the previous talk, only it's only lessons learned, basically. Culture fit actually matters. It's not obvious that it matters when you are a startup and working with a big company. But Alfa Laval are, also engineering culture. They're quite informal. In my previous job, I had one instance where I got thrown out from a meeting because I didn't have a suit. And that's really not happening at Alfa Laval. People kind of care a lot about the substance of what you say. They are, not everyone, but kind of the thing that permeates the company is that they're in some sense truth seekers. This was Jan's slide. The idea here is that don't just focus on the bad things about each other, but actually focus on the good things, like you do when you're dating before you get married. And I think he mostly meant that not symmetrically. He mostly meant that basically he saw past my problems. So this one is quite important. There really isn't any sales anymore. Sales is absolutely dead. If you're working with large companies and you're trying to do sales, it's really not a good idea to do that. This is kind of like the Buddhist concept of I. The more you look at sales, the more you realize that there isn't really any sales. So, all else equal, especially if you're not a sales professional, the best thing you can do is really to just focus on solving the company's problem. And if you only focus on that and then have read no books and basically know nothing about sales otherwise, you probably will do quite fine. So this was something that we actually, one example of this is we take engineers who are not that experienced and we put them in front of the customers. And sometimes, people come back to me and say, hey, why don't you take this presentation instead? And Not that that's already a low bar. So, but it builds trust because people believe that we're there actually to help them and not to, maximize the revenue we can get or something like that. Give before you get, it's so cliche, I'm going to skip that one. Intentions matter. This is something that I learned from my previous boss. This basically means before you have a meeting, you kind of go to the restroom. I actually did that today as well before I came to stage. And then you just really think through your intentions. And it's just that simple. You just think like, what do I really want out of this meeting? But not just in terms of my goals, but like, what do I really, like, what is really my intention? Is it to just, convince someone? Is it to actually make someone believe something? And that's really valuable, I think. And this is quite related to that. So it's basically, these things take a long time. So if you focus on wanting to win or kind of the end product, like actually getting to an enterprise agreement with the CIO or CEO of Alfa Laval, it takes a really long time. And you become very frustrated. And, it took 1.5 years for us. So if you instead always just focus on preparing, then it's all of a sudden much easier because that you can always do. It's always in your control. This is actually quite important. It also sounds like a cliche. But basically, the reason why we succeeded at closing a deal with Alfa Laval and why we now have a working relationship is that we don't even focus actually on the solution initially. We just focus on the relationship. So not the product, not the technology, not even the solution, the things that sounds good, like you should be focusing on. But the reason why I think this works is because by focusing on the relationship, you build trust. And if you don't have trust, like it's really not going to happen. A startup and a large organization, there's so much asymmetries there. So there really has to be a lot of trust for things to work out. And this one, it's spelled by wrong with purpose here. This alludes to a song. But it's not a nice to have a true champion. Usually, I know that people who read sales book, kind of a parenthesis is, you should have a champion and, economic buyer, etc. But we had a champion from day one, and I would say it's really the main reason why we managed to pull all the way through. All right. So that was kind of some learnings before the pilot. You have to have a champion, etc. Some things during the pilot, and please flag me when my time runs out. I don't know who I'm looking at. Okay, yeah. So first one, actually, this is a lesson that we actually didn't really learn from the pilot, but we learned it from a book, but we applied it in the pilot. And this means you ask the reverse question, basically. So you say, how would we fuck this up? How would it look like if we were dead in the water with Alfa Laval? And the reason why you do that is because then you know where you shouldn't go. So if you say, one way to fuck this up would be if we just start to focus on the slides, for example. That doesn't work at Alfa Laval. And then that's a great way. Then you have checked off one thing that you know. And actually, it's really helpful for knowing what to do, to ask this kind of reverse question. Yeah, this was Jan's slide. I forget really what he wanted to say here. I'm trying to represent him here. We were going to do every other one and kind of do some banter. Yeah, so this one is quite interesting and quite counterintuitive. So when it comes to user training and user adoption and rolling out to users, it's good to actually be quite elitist and keep teachers pets and really not be democratic and be very un-Swedish. And basically, there are a few users who's going to give you really, really big wins. And then there are a lot of users that it's enough if they're just over a certain threshold, at least initially. Not in the long term, but initially. And if you focus on making everyone good and everyone a believer from day one, it's really not a good idea if you're a startup and you're kind of only trying to build trust. Only beginning to build trust. Yeah, and one thing that McKinsey consultants do, and a lot of consultants in general, is that they kind of go macro and then they just stay macro. So you have to really go into the details in order to understand the macro, understand the full picture. And I'll round this off. Are you giving me a signal?
Yeah.
I'm very bad at getting signals in general.
Let me stand closer then.
Okay, thanks. So I'll skip through some of these and just end with one that I thought Jan had, which was quite interesting. So you can really get his point with this slide was that there are some first order effects of working together. There's our ROI, there is, you can see the benefits in the organization, and you can kind of make all these like lists and Excel spreadsheets. But then there are second order effects, which is like how does Alfa Laval benefit from working with us long term in terms of learning from our engineers, learning how we think about innovation and these things that they want from the small startups. And from our side, it's really the second order effects of, for example, references and things like that actually has been much more important than we thought. I'm not really doing him justice this slide, but I think I was going to say something like that. So I'll finish off here. Oh, this is our slogan, by the way. This is the last slide I have. So we believe in not automating as much as possible, which really helps when you're talking to users who are otherwise don't want to be automated away. And our philosophy is to amplify human intelligence. So it's intelligence amplification, IA, instead of AI. And that means that in all our products, in all our platform, we always have a human in the loop. And I haven't talked really about what our company does, and that's with purpose. I wanted to just focus on these lessons. But if you are curious what we do, we automate technical support. We're a platform for doing that. And we're going to be around. We have a table somewhere in the corner, and we have some demos if you want to see our product. And the company's name is Mavenoid, if I didn't introduce it properly.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
So I forgot this with the last group, so I will have to find you afterwards. I'm going to start with the gift. Let me put it here. As Lena said, these are really great at knowing whether or not you're wasting energy. Another really great way to make sure you don't use enough electricity is to have an 8-month-old son, and you have to plug all of the electrical points. You can never plug anything in. So either that or my son. These are your two choices. I had my reflection, when I hear you, and I hear this so often with startups, you said it took a year, you had to meet 53 people, and it's a long time. But can I ask the corporates in the room, if you could get a successful collaboration with a startup in just a year and only meeting 53 people, would you also say it was very long? How many would say it's very long? Corporates. Look at that. How many would say it's pretty decent? Shy hands, I'm seeing you. It's just that we have different concepts of time. And I'm just so impressed with this perseverance. Why do you think you kept going? After the 52nd meeting, why didn't you stop?
So in our case, it is making the commitment ahead of time, actually. Mm-hmm. I should probably not give that official away, what actually the timeline is. But no, but just in general, also, I can tell you, with our startup, the commitment is minimum 2 years from start date, even with zero progress.
Okay.
And then it's similar when you work with a large org that you actually commit ahead of time how much you're going to invest.
I think that's so fascinating because I don't think I've met a lot of startups that have that clearly in their thinking, I will give this company X amount of time. I think that's absolutely fascinating to think about. And why do you think, I know you have to speak on his behalf, but why do you think that they bet on you when you didn't have a fancy MVP or anything else to show? What was it?
So I think it mainly was actually the team and that there was a trust that we were going to do whatever it takes to make what we say happen. Mm. And how that trust actually develops, I think it is actually super subtle. It's like really hard to answer that.
Try for me, because that's where I want to get at. That's the hardest question I know.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, in the meetings, I often get the feedback that I'm intellectually honest to a fault. Mm. And I think it's the same thing with basically everyone in our company. Mm-hmm. And, we had a culture meeting the other day for the first time where, you kind of write up what are our cultural values. And everyone, like the one thing everyone agreed on was like seek truth and, independent thinking. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it kind of, if you are bad at a lot of other things, if you're just trying naively to seek the truth and do the right thing, it kind of brushes over a lot of the weaknesses you have as a startup. Mm-hmm.
So be true, not so shiny, but be yourself and try to have an open dialogue. Is that what you're?
Yeah, and I mean, we come to meetings with T-shirts. Like I don't dress more fancy than this when I go and meet people high up there, and kind of, I think they see through anyway that you're a little startup. So just because you put a suit on before you go there, they're not going to sign a deal with you. So it's better to just be yourself.
Thank you so much. This was a fantastic talk. Thank you so much for your time.